If only they knew. The hub for young business minds.
Yes, people, it's Ted Lawlor, and welcome back to another episode of the If Only They Knew podcast. Today, we're joined by Marietta Hickman, founder of Cheeky Nibble, and she speaks about the importance of being true to who you are, what she learned from her time in Germany and India, as well as so much more. So, if you want to embrace your true self, this is the podcast for you.
Okay, great. So I'm Marietta and I founded Cheeky Nibble, which is a vegan and nut-free granola brand with all the flavors inspired by nostalgic British desserts and just delicious sweet treats. And the whole idea was to create a granola which have massive clusters, so you can snack on it and have a cheeky nibble on the go, as well as having it for breakfast.
Perfect. And before we sort of dive into the business side of things, I quite like diving into the person behind the brand. So before we get into who you are now in terms of, just in terms of how you've developed and grown, who would you say you were before all of this? Like, do you think you were a different person before you got involved in the business world? Or, because I know, like with me, like I feel like I've changed quite a bit. Like my confidence has definitely evolved and I just feel a bit more independent. So who were you before you entered the business world?
I think before I started Cheeky Nibble, I knew I always wanted to build a brand. So in terms of business mind, and I was in brand building before in my previous job, but I think I trust my gut a lot more now. So that confidence you were talking about, I definitely feel has grown. I hide less about myself. A huge part of starting Cheeky Nibble was for my own mental health, and rather than it being kind of not like a secret, but rather something I don't really talk about, it's now something I discuss with my customers, with people at fairs and online all the time. So I think I'm much more true to myself, more authentic. I'm living life more authentically since starting it. So I haven't really changed, but I'm more me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And am I right in saying you were involved in the business world, like you was working in Germany for a bit as well, wasn't you? Like you were sort of involved, obviously, like many of us in a 9 to 5, but it seemed like your job in Germany, if I'm correct, it seemed very logistical and somewhat entrepreneurial, I guess, in terms of like the skills that I assume you would have picked up. Is that right? Tell us more about that time in that role.
Well, the whole Germany thing happened very spontaneously. I was there on holiday while still studying at university, and I met somebody I interviewed this man because I was gathering data for my dissertation at university, and he offered me the job on the spot.
Wow.
Then I moved to Germany and completed my degree remotely. So it was all very spontaneous. The job itself changed a lot whilst I was there. It was started more in business development, more brand focused, and then ended up more account management. But actually the majority of the time I was there was during the pandemic. And most of my job was basically helping organize the procurement and logistics of getting masks from China into Germany for the major German retailers who are our clients. So my official job was in cosmetics, but actually in practice, I have more experience in logistics and medical masks now than in cosmetics.
Did that feed what you was doing then in terms of the work at Cheeky Nibble? Did that sort of give you a few more skills or a few more things under your belt to sort of help you with what you're doing in the business world?
Definitely. I think that one thing you have to do when you're sort of an account manager and managing other people's brands, we were in manufacturing. So things like registering a product, the information required on the boxes legally, like ingredients list and like information, business address, this is stuff that I already knew had to be done. So when I started Cheeky Nibble, I knew I had to look into trademarks. I knew I had to look into, what was the legal requirements for a food product's packaging. So it allowed me to be out of the gate with a brand that was very finished and professional looking, which I think helped massively getting me into retailers early on, which helped me make a profit early on because I wasn't growing sort of at bake sales in farmers markets for very long. I had a finished product that was ready for the shelf from the get-go. Even though I was still baking in my parents' kitchen, the product looked like it was made in a factory.
That must have felt good though, right? Like sort of going through those levels quite quickly and having that level of professionalism that so many people sort of strive for in the early years. And then some people just can't get that right, can they, straight away? It takes experience to go through those gears almost and perfect the packaging, perfect the branding, perfect the messaging, and most importantly, the product. So yeah, did that feel good? I guess it did, to sort of get through those gears rather quickly.
No, I think it was very helpful that I knew what to look for. Obviously, food is very different to cosmetics in terms of like the requirements, but I knew that I had to investigate it. I wasn't as naive as I could have been to what I needed to do the research on. I also had a lot of technical skills on building websites and Photoshop and Illustrator, so I could build my own website and design my own packaging to a professional level, which saved me a lot of money, basically. So I could invest all my savings into commercial equipment and ingredients and those startup costs. I didn't have to spend any of my savings to get somebody else to build a website or design the packaging. That was something that the only thing was my time, which is free for me.
I think that's an important point though, like in terms of a lot of the people I bring on, they always, some people don't even realize like they did it, like being involved in the industry or the process of some sort that links to the business they're running or about to run. So like the people I've had on, like if they're in the if they've got a media company, they were working as runners in the production industry and sort of getting that behind the scene looks of the cameras and how all the little things work. And you know, there's so many examples of people doing that in their field. So would you advise that for other people to sort of get that look at the industry before they actually get involved in the business side of things?
Yeah, I think that having previous experience, like obviously mine was not to do with food, but it was in production and manufacturing, building a business and a brand. It helps you have a sort of good sense of what you need, what research you need to do, what boxes you need to tick. And obviously if you just have had no experience, you might not know what you need to do. But I still had to sit down and spend days researching what needed to be done. So I wouldn't let not having experience stop you starting a business. If you can get advice from people, you can do the research and educate yourself. Like I taught myself how to use Photoshop. It's not something that I learned on the job. I taught myself how to do it because I knew I wanted to do it myself to save money. So there's no reason, you don't need to have a previous job to then go, oh, I was a runner, so now I can set up a media company. If you're straight out of university, have you not even studied something relevant, but you realize you want to study a media company, you can email people on LinkedIn who are in the media company. I think you can do the research yourself. Having experience just, I think, lets you skip a couple of steps, but it's not steps that can't be achieved on your own.
That's it. And I've realized like a lot of the things, I also did that with Photoshop, and I now use Canva because it was a little bit easier, but it helped me get started initially in the graphic design world. And I realized like pretty much everything you would want to learn or would need to learn, like there's courses online, whether you have to pay for them. So, for the most part, they're free on YouTube. But I wanted to dive in because you spoke about going to Germany, and am I right in saying you also went to India with your family for quite a few years, right?
Yeah, so I lived in India for 4 years. I was at boarding school in the UK, so I wasn't in India full time. I didn't study there. I just would go there for sort of months at a time in the holidays, and it was really an amazing experience. I think as a 16-year-old, it was quite difficult being a young woman there because you didn't have much freedom, just because it's not that safe. Yeah. But with hindsight, it's an incredibly rich culture, and I feel very lucky to have been able to experience it so intimately, rather than just like on a gap year or on a holiday.
Am I right in also saying that like they're seeing their culture and their, like you said, their rich culture is really, really strong culture, isn't it? Like that, am I right in saying that sort of made you reflect on the British culture, and that's what influenced your product and your brand now, that looking back at that nostalgia of the British culture?
I think so many things, like even just living in Germany, more so Germany than India, because when I was in India, I was kind of back and forth with the UK a lot. But when I moved to Germany and I was sort of stuck there for a long time, I was very homesick and I was alone. I spent months in a studio apartment, and because of the lockdown, didn't leave. So I only had like the four walls around me, and I really missed sort of home comforts. We're very lucky that with Zoom and everything, that I could still talk to my family, but the nostalgia for the British desserts was born a little bit out of slight homesickness when I was coming up with the idea in Germany. And then as for India, I think India just instilled in me, an appreciation for culture, appreciation for, diversity. I mean, we're very multicultural Britain, and living in India and seeing that connection was really interesting.
And before we go into the actual product itself and look at the reflections of some of that nostalgia, I wanted to dive into one more thing about your personal life, if you don't mind. I've read somewhere, and I've read on your LinkedIn and also on your website about is it Tourette's, ADHD, and autism. Now, the ADHD, is that correct first? Okay, sorry.
No, so I was diagnosed with Tourette's disorder, which is made worse when I'm anxious. Several years ago, it was getting progressively worse. My tics, I was starting to fall over. I was getting tics every 30 minutes or so. It was quite debilitating at the time. And then I was diagnosed with that, and I was very fortunate that exercise really, really helped me, and a lot of exercise really helped me. But because I was exercising so much, I was very hungry all the time. And one of the other things that helped with my anxiety and helped reduce my sort of tics was baking. So I started baking granola that was big enough to snack on, because I was exercising so much that I needed to have snacks with me all the time. And then recently, in the last few weeks, I was also finally diagnosed with autism. They had thought it was ADHD, and it wasn't. That was ruled out through another assessment. And with hindsight, there's so many, it's so obvious looking back on my life, and also looking at how I set up Cheeky Nibble, this kind of love of routine and process and all these typically autistic traits, has been actually kind of helpful to me, because I can kind of obsessively maximize my productivity despite being by myself.
How has that impacted you then? Because it seems like almost a good thing, because I know there's a lot of stigma attached to those labels, I guess is a term for it. Because I think you liked my LinkedIn post today. I put out a LinkedIn post about ADHD. I have never been diagnosed with it, but it's like what you said, sort of when I understood what the symptoms were, looking back, it's like, okay, it all fits together nicely and makes sense if I was to have it. And I know with work and stuff, if I've had to tell people in the past that I've got it, because I could feel them judging me, I'd forget stuff, and they'd be looking at me as if I was an idiot. I'll just put it out straight. They'd sort of be like, oh, you can't ask Ted because he'll just forget, and oh, make sure you write it down. And
I think when you I think I love being open about it now, especially now that I have a name for it. I've been formally diagnosed. It's a huge relief for me. I think that it's good to be open about it, because then people can manage their expectations of you, and also you can create an environment where all the things about that, with ADHD, there'll be equal things that make you incredibly unique and special, as might actually be quite difficult. And if you can create an environment to maximize your strengths and reduce your weaknesses, that's huge. Being autistic, I struggle with a lot of things. I mean, I struggle with sensory overload. I struggle with a lot of things, but I can create an environment by running my own business to reduce the things I struggle with and to focus on my strengths, which is my love of routine, which can be quite debilitating if you're in an office and spontaneously people want to do things and do you want to grab a coffee, and I find that a little bit overwhelming. but actually, if you need to bake 100 boxes every day by yourself, is incredibly useful. So there's two sides to every coin. And the great thing about knowing that about yourself, like with your ADHD, is you can curate that environment to get the best out of yourself, which is important. Not even if you don't want to own your own business, just for your job. If you know where your strengths are and you know what your weaknesses are, people will get the best out of you, and you'll feel more satisfied in yourself.
And I was giggling to myself there as you were speaking, because that is literally me as well. Like, if before, when I was at work and they'd be like, oh, let's go for beers tonight, like on a random spontaneous one, I'm like, oh, I don't know, like it just hurts my brain to do something random like that. So it's yeah, that's what it feels like. Even though it's literally an hour of my day, it feels like it knocks my whole routine off, and it I don't know, it just drives me nuts. But I think that's an important point, to know yourself, whether it's from the angle of ADHD or autism, or simply your communication style with other people. I think you've made a really good point there in terms of understanding who you are.
I also think that, the person who's most critical of you is yourself. And as soon as I got the diagnosis, I don't beat myself up so much. Like if my friends say, do you want to do this? And I'm like, no, because I don't want to break my routine. It upsets me. I don't feel guilty. I used to be like, oh my God, you're so antisocial. Like everyone must think you're so weird. Like now I'm like, I don't care. This is what I need. This is who I am. And I embrace it more. So I think, the more you know about yourself, the less critical you'll be, because you have more empathy, I think. And empathy for yourself is just as important as empathy for others, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's so many, like you alluded to, there's so many tools and processes that you can implement for yourself or your friends, family, or even like the working team around you that can help support what you're doing, isn't it? Like for me, I like listening to brown noise, because I feel like whenever there's white noise, but I've found brown noise like recently. So whenever I put
brown noise, I've never heard of brown noise.
Really, it's like it's like white noise but less deafening. Like for me, it feels a bit more. You can't really hear it. It just sort of, it's really weird, because when I turn it on, I go to think of things and it's like my brain's just like switched off. Whereas normally I'm like, even now, I'm thinking of things in my mind as I'm talking. So when I play that, it just shuts it all off.
But whilst that in some situations, your mind going everywhere, it can be incredibly distracting and you can lose where you are, and then you can get into trouble in meetings and stuff like that because your mind is elsewhere. It also is because your mind is working so much faster than maybe a neurotypical person might do. And it probably helps you with your creativity and problem solving. So there'll be benefits as well, I'm sure, to your mind racing and being inspired easily.
Yeah, that's it. It's a bit of a struggle on a podcast, I'm not gonna lie, but it's good for all the marketing and creative stuff I do. So yeah, it's got its pros and cons. Yeah, but talking again of your product, let's get into your brand. So you mentioned like some of the first steps you took to build the brand, but how did you get it all together in terms of the packaging and the overall feel? Because the branding and the design and the feel and the tone of voice of the messaging, it's all fit really nicely. Like I was having a look at it and it's pretty much perfect, like from a branding marketing perspective.
It's my baby, so that's always nice to hear. I mean, I think it all came together when things are right, they're right. So it came together very quickly. I always loved reading cartoons growing up. I have the entire Peanuts collection, all the Beanos and Dandies, and manga illustrations as well. So I knew I wanted this kind of cartoon style because I didn't really see that anywhere. And I thought, I want to do dessert inspired granola because I want these nostalgic flavors. So why not have illustrated boxes? I wanted this sort of nostalgic cereal box shape as well. And then having a little cartoon on the back, because I used to love reading the cartoons on the back of cereal boxes. I also noticed a lot with other granolas on the market when I started doing some research that they all have a very sort of, I don't say health washing, but everything looks like it's super healthy and super good for you. And actually, if I can compare my nutritional content to that of pretty much any supermarket or major brand, it's about exactly the same calories, same sugar, same carbs, but I'm not pretending to be this like super healthy product. I'm, you know, it's a treat, it's a cheeky nibble, it is dessert inspired granola. So I kind of lent into the fun and the joy of food rather than trying to pretending that I'm like all super healthy. Because, you know, it's all subjective. Is everything in moderation, and finding joy in food is just as important as something being the nutritional benefits of food.
It is weird because I always find with my guests there's like an overriding theme between the things they do and like the things they're saying on the podcast, and it feels like the theme for this chat has been like authenticity. So being true to yourself as a person, but also true to yourself as the product, like not sort of pretending to be something else, just being what it says on the packaging.
I always try and tell myself whenever I make a decision, you're better off being the best for one person than being mediocre for many. And every time you know, when people are like, are you going to do a low sugar one? Like, no, because a lot of my customers, you know, are in ED recovery, and I do not want to put the message out there that they need to be eating the low sugar version of my product. They can eat cheeky nibble because it's delicious and it's good and it makes them happy, and that's important. And you know, people are like, oh, I've had customers come up and say, oh, are you ever going to do a plain flavor? Probably not. If you want a plain flavored granola, you can get another brand. And it's not arrogance, it's just I know what my mission is and I don't need to detract from that. And I'd rather, you know, have a few loyal customers than many people who try it once and then it's like average.
I really like that. It's making me think, how detailed have you been with the whole process, and have you had any people help with certain things? Or because I know with me, like, this is really embarrassing, but the first logo I made for If Only They Knew, the podcast and the media group, like the crown was off center, and I didn't realize for I think almost a year, or it was a good few months, because my attention to detail is so low. So yeah, I was just wondering, your brand seems so perfect. So how detailed and how what's the word, like fine have you been with the small things?
Well, I think one of the benefits of being autistic is that we tend to have, I mean, in general, autistic people tend to have a very strong attention to detail and almost obsessively thorough research and things like that. So in terms of the branding and everything like that, I just did a lot of work, and I spotted small things that other people might not spot. But I did get help. And I think one thing is I'm not very social, and Cheeky Nibble has really pushed me out of my comfort zone because I have had to ask for help and reach out to people, which I never would normally be, I wouldn't never have been brave enough to in the past. And I think I realized that people are there to help you. You know, I was in constant communication with my local council, getting advice on how to pass my food hygiene rating, and they were really helpful. Getting advice on, you know, allergen support from allergy food standards agencies. People are really kind, especially to young entrepreneurs. They do want to help you. You just need to ask for it. Don't let your arrogance, or don't let your, in my case, fear of speaking to people hold you back. Just, you know, you don't know if you don't ask. The worst they can do is ignore you, or say they're too busy. And then you can find someone else to help you, or do what you were going to do in the first place in Google.
Yeah, I love that. Last few things on the product. Am I right in saying that you converted an old RAF base into your warehouse? Is that right?
So there's an old RAF base near my village here in Norfolk, and there's a lot of sort of abandoned buildings, and I was very lucky that somebody I knew owned several of the buildings, because they operate their business out of one of the hangars, and they had what was the old fire station, which was sort of semi-refurbished. Some of the rooms were kind of completely the same as they were when there was a fire station, you know, even with the sort of kerosene labels on the walls, and some of the rooms were, you know, had been replastered and stuff like that. So I began renting that, and I bought secondhand commercial catering equipment from the army, and made a little commercial kitchen in an old RAF base with old army equipment. So it's all very British in there.
Yeah.
Which works well for the British granola.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've never really heard of someone doing that before. I really like that idea. Would you say that's the best thing that you've like achieved or done with the business, or what would you say would be your biggest accomplishment with the business, like in terms of milestones or quirky things you've done?
Yeah, well, I mean, things like the RAF base and refurbishing that. I'm very into sustainability. That's not really a branding thing with me. I'm not there trying to market myself necessarily as super sustainable or green. It was just imperative to me. I mean, it's the hottest day of the year. There's clearly a climate change issue going on. And sustainability should be at the forefront of any business starting up, whether you want to be a sustainable business or not. So all my packaging is compostable. I didn't want to build a new building. I wanted to see if I could refurbish an existing building. And so, yeah, things like that were important to me. In terms of milestones, just obviously there are big milestones like getting into a big retailer or doing a big fair or getting an award. Like very early on, I got the Kettle Foods New Business Award. That was like a few months in. So that was amazing. But my motivation every day is just the messages I get from girls, mainly girls on Instagram. A lot of them struggling with eating disorders, and how much Cheeky Nibble has reignited their joy in food. That's what motivates me every day. The feedback I get and the messages I receive are so touching. Yeah, that's probably lots of little milestones every day.
And on the flip side, what is some of the worst things that have happened? Have you had anything that you thought, oh no, I wish this didn't happen to me? Or yeah, what's the worst thing that's happened to you in terms of the business?
I mean, there's lots of little things that happen. You know, it's again really hot day. You know, my vegan chocolate might be delayed. There's little things like delays in the supply chains that are just annoying and frustrating. I'm trying to think of like a big. I mean, I've made mistakes. I baked. This is a really good example. I once was so distracted thinking about the business that when I was baking, I forgot the flour. So 25 of my boxes were edible, but not the same. They had no flour in, and I couldn't sell it because if any of my customers would kind of be like, oh, it wasn't consistent with the product I'd been marketing and people were expecting. So I was because I hate food waste. It's a huge pet peeve. It's terrible for the environment. So I was like, what am I going to do with these 25 boxes? I can't throw them out, but I can't sell them. And then but they're perfectly edible. They're crunchy. They're nice. I just can't sell them because they don't match the ingredient list. Like it's not right. But luckily my local Tesco's had a food bank, so I donated them. So just shows you that even in what is like a massive, like, oh my God, you're such an idiot moment. I was so angry with myself that actually a huge positive came out of it. I could donate to a food bank and prevent food waste. So every cloud has a silver lining. You just have to think a little bit and problem solve and sort something out.
That's it. I love that bit of advice. Last bit of advice then, if you don't mind. Obviously this show's called If Only They Knew. So what is one thing that you wish you knew at an earlier stage in the business, or perhaps an earlier stage in your life, just in general?
I think follow what your passion is, because often you can be good at things that you don't love, and often you can be bad at things that you do love, but you will never be the best unless you love it. And not that you have to be the best at everything, but life is kind of short and you might as well do what you love, because you're not guaranteed success by doing something that people think of as impressive. If you want, the most successful people are the happiest people, and you'll never be happy unless you do something you enjoy.
I love that. So what's next for you then in terms of the brand and yourself as an entrepreneur?
So, I mean, I'm hoping to go gluten-free, because my whole point of Cheeky Nibble is to spread the joy in food, and to have a huge portion of the population unable to eat it because of its gluten, for me, doesn't sit right. So I'm going to go gluten-free. So I'll be free from all 14 of the major allergens. And then I want to automate, instead of hiring a lot of people to bake the granola, I want to automate as much of the process as possible and invest in robots and machines to make the granola, because that makes it safer for everybody. Because the less people involved, the less cross-contamination risk with allergens. So that's kind of long-term goal, is to make a really safe product for everyone to enjoy.
Perfect. And tied in with that, what do you want your legacy to be, if you want a legacy at all?
I would love my legacy to be from on a business perspective, somebody that just made a lot of people happy and made people smile every time they opened a box of Cheeky Nibble. Spreading joy is, I think, the best feeling, making people happy. So yeah, just spreading as much joy as possible through a Cheeky Nibble.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much. You've definitely spread some joy on this chat, so thank you.
I'm sweating so much, so
I know, yeah. Yeah. For those listening, we're recording this on like the hottest day of the year, so yeah, I definitely appreciate your time. Last thing, if you've got a final message or you just want to tell people where to find out more about yourself or the brand, yeah, please do so.
Yeah, so you can follow us on Instagram. We're cheeky_nibble. I also have a website, www.cheekynibble.com. And if you want to see more of me being cringy, making videos, you can follow me on TikTok at cheeky_nibble as well. But I'm really embarrassing on there. So yeah, come and support me being embarrassing.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Like I said, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I really appreciate your time, especially in this weather.
Thank you. I had a good time.